Maybe he's just fed up of Paladin at this stage, played too much of it in the past, and he just wants to move on. But both players with a Priest, both players with a Warrior, and Hunter versus Shaman, essentially. But we're into this series, and it's going to be Dan bringing his Shaman to the lineup up against Jambray's Taunt Warrior here. And this is looking like a very top-heavy Shaman here, potentially a control-style deck.
Absolutely. In a tournament I was casting recently, I've started to see more and more very late game styles of Shaman that run almost no threats in the late game, but they just their anticipation is to heal and remove for the longest time, and then in the very late game, your win condition can either be Calamos and Servant of Calamos to generate tremendous amounts of value, or it can be to go for something like Spirit Echoes to regenerate all your cards to your hand, which in this particular matchup is incredibly valuable, because even if you're only putting the Spirit Echoes on totems, that is more fodder for the Ragnaros hero power to hit from the Quest Warrior.
Yeah, certainly. From my experience playing this Taunt Warrior deck, Shaman is one of the most frustrating classes to play against, specifically because of what you just mentioned, those totems. Every single turn, they can just drop an extra target for Ragnaros, or not Ragnaros, but Die Insect to hit away and kind of avoid the targets you actually want to be dealing with. But straight on into this one, Jambray, not with the greatest hand in the history of the world, but also not the worst case scenario either. He has that Stonehill Defender, which for this style of warrior is unbelievably important.
That is a fantastic point to bring up. You don't really need cards like Fiery War Axe, which are so devastatingly powerful in some matchups, in this particular matchup against the Shaman, as long as you are just playing taunt after taunt to complete the quest and get the Ragnaros hero power as quickly as possible, then you're going to be in a very nice spot, because if the game goes on for too long, then it's just going to be too many minions on the board from the Shaman, I would imagine.
And now already Jambray has a decision to make, because there's the Acolyte of Pain in hand, which in a lot of scenarios you want to just drop an Acolyte on 3 because you can get cycling through your deck. But I agree with this decision to drop your taunt here, start to look for more taunts, and just build towards your hero power, because you don't know what kind of Shaman this is, right? And if it is that control Shaman, which there was fairly decent odds it was going to be, you have to get that quest done ASAP.
Absolutely, and I think one of the other things that he was considering is looking forward to that turn 5 play, because now with Direhorn Hatchling in the Warrior's arsenal, as well as Ali Armorsmith, there are 2 very powerful 5-drop taunt cards, and being able to play that on turn 5 rather than the hero power, which you really want to be using as little as possible in this matchup, makes a lot of sense.
So now over to Dan. He does have the option to just drop things like a Thing from Below, and also it does have those Hot Spring Guardians, but generally speaking, one of the things with this kind of Shaman deck is a lot of the early turns you find yourself just dropping that hero power and moving on, because even your Hot Spring Guardians, as much as you'd want to play them on curve, using that heal effectively can be the difference between winning or losing a game.
It absolutely can. And already I'm starting to see that this kind of feels like more of a throwback to the Crusher Shaman, I believe was the name of the archetype back in the day, where you play these massive minions like the Earth Elemental, and then you slam cards like the Ancestral Spirit on it, so it comes back forever and ever. And that's going to be especially impactful against a warrior deck, where there's no transform or silence effects in the deck. So that Death Rattle will go off, and that is another 7/8 that you have got for 2 mana.
Yeah. And that one doesn't cost any overlay, so it's even better scenario. And I mean, whoa, there off the top as well. So next turn, like, Dan has 2 fantastic turn 6s available to him. You can either just drop Aya, which is, you know, always fantastic on turn 6, or Earth Elemental, coin into Ancestral Spirit, another phenomenal power turn. And Jambray, his hand, while it doesn't look terrible or anything like that, when you've got huge power swings in the hand of Dan, you've got to say that right now he's looking fantastic.
Absolutely. And one of the main benefits of playing these high-powered Death Rattle minions is that you're leaving yourself significantly less vulnerable to Brawl. If you're throwing down Aya or the Earth Elemental and Ancestral Spirit on the next turn, either way, if a Brawl does come down, you're not really overextending, because you will still have something incredibly impactful available to you. I think with this line of play, he's using up the coin on this turn and creating a Jade Golem, so that I definitely imagine he's lining up to go for Aya Blackboar on the following turn.
Now, there was no Ravaging Ghoul pulled here by Jambray, and that Dust Devil is a significant threat. Getting that out of the Maelstrom portal is actually huge. 6 damage per turn. And right now, there's no real way to deal with it for Jambray. It's just going to shield block and search for answers at this stage. But again, no Ravaging Ghoul, which would have been the perfect draw for him right there.
It really would have been, and I think this is actually, the Dust Devil is significantly more impactful in this build of Shaman than it could be in some of the other, I suppose you'd call it Concede Shaman decks, because this one, as it goes into the late game, it has the potential to deliver tremendous amounts of damage, as we can already see with the Earth Elemental. So if you can attack in a few times with that Dust Devil, completely clear off the opponent's armor, then you're putting yourself in a significantly better position to just start killing your opponent, potentially before they even get too much value out of the Die Insect hero power at all.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you say there is, clearing the armor is super significant, because when you look at Jambray, at the end of turn 6 having 9 armor, he's in a normal circumstance, you'd be sitting pretty, right? You'd be quite comfortable with that huge amount of armor you've built up. But because of that Dust Devil and the easy available trades on the board right now for Dan, that is going to be heavily whittled away at this turn. And I'm curious to see whether he does go for Aya or whether he commits straight away. In fact, not by the looks of things going for either of those turn 6 plays that we talked about earlier. Had already used that coin, in fact, so can't use the Earth Elemental anymore.
I think the main consideration here is, with the Hot Spring Guardian, a lot of the time you're going to be sending that heal to face, but you would much rather get the full value of that heal on a minion where possible. So while he has a damaged minion, considering putting it on that to deny a potential execute, but overall this is definitely the higher power play, and also it even leaves you less vulnerable to Brawl, even though you're committing a higher value minion.
Yeah, that death rattle from Aya will be hugely impactful in the decision on whether or not to use a Brawl at all. Again, still no Ravager Ghoul, still no Whirlwind effect at all available for Jambray. Does have a Fiery War Axe though, which is enough damage to finish off this thing from below. Also has options available for the rest of that turn as well, in terms of this Ali Armorsmith, just to try and block some of this damage coming in. And again, it's not quite enough to deal with the Dust Devil, but he's slowing the pace at least.
That's exactly it, and he realized that this will probably be enough just to put a bit of a roadblock in the aggression. Well, I call it aggression, this is clearly a control Shaman, but the attack value that's coming forward from the Shaman.
You're absolutely right though, even though this is a control Shaman, this is absolute aggression coming out from Dan. He's coming out of the box swinging at this stage, and I can't see any signs of stopping at this rate either, because there's that Earth Elemental with Ancestral Spirit that, again, even against a Brawl, still feels pretty great.
It feels incredibly juicy indeed. But the main card I want to point out from Jambray is the Primordial Drake, which is available on the following turn. Even though the Ali Armorsmith isn't enough damage to kill the Eye of Blackthor and only weakens a lot of the minions, if he can just get everything down to 2 health, that Primordial Drake is going to be absolutely devastating. But Dan SWF clearly realizes this as well and is playing against that exact card. This was a smelly play, I think you could call it if you wanted to, where he knew that Primordial Drake was very likely to come down on turn 8, so he's giving himself the maximum potential. We could even see the sacrifice of the Dust Devil, but I suppose if he doesn't play the Primordial Drake, he will have been thoroughly bamboozled and be quite sad.
It looks like he's going to set this one up so that the thing from below will survive, and also he doesn't mind so much if Aya dies, because once again you're going to replace that with another Jade Golem, so it's not the end of the world for him now. Over on the side of Jambray, as we mentioned before, Primordial Drake, definitely just the place for this turn.
Absolutely, no question about it. Fills out the mana perfectly, which nothing else would have done. And it even damages a lot of the minions which it doesn't kill, to lead into a potential sleep with the fishes on the following turn. Because as we can see here, hexing the Primordial Drake feels perfectly fine, because it's definitely one of the biggest minions, if not the biggest minion, outside of the Direhorn Matriarch that is available in the Taunt Warrior deck. So hexing that is perfectly fine, and then just carrying on pushing forward with the board, and still has the massive reload in case of a board clear with the Earth Elemental into Ancestral Spirit.
And now the downside to this board that Dan has built up is now you actually are playing into Brawl. Brawl is now suddenly an effective card. Unfortunately for Jambray, he doesn't have one in his hand. So as of right now, it's not a concern for Dan, but he is not aware of that. So in these next couple of turns, you might see him hold back a couple of plays that you would think are safe because we can see both hands. But in reality, he's playing around cards like Brawl. But Looks like that's not what we're going to see just yet. Sleep with the Fish is being hovered here for Jambray. Would clear away 2 of these minions. And then just going to drop the Curator to try and find some more answers.
Absolutely. We can know that he will be drawing 2 minions here because every Taunt Warrior deck runs 2 Primordial Drakes. And I believe the standard at the moment is to play only 1 Direhorn Hatchling as your single beast. Because even though it dies, even though it's only 1 beast in your whole deck, when it dies, it obviously shuffles the second beast back into your deck. So you're very likely to still get that beast draw from the Curator. And here we can see probably the top of Dan's deck is the Kalamos Primal Lord. No way of activating it on this turn, but the Earth Elemental is now, it has been updated to be an Elemental, obviously it's in the name, and Hot Spring Guardian is also available to activate it, so I'd be very unsurprised to see some kind of an Elemental come down on this turn, as he kind of tested the water for a Brawl on the previous turn. It was a fairly threatening board and it didn't come down. So feeling pretty happy to throw down this board as once again he's leaving himself actually pretty resilient against the Brawl.
Throwing down a hefty board, but also throwing down potential lethal next turn with the Jade Claws there. Also just Kalamos's one of his abilities to just smite them in the face for a sheer damage at this stage. And Dan getting very close to finishing things off. Now Fireplume's Heart could be the difference maker right now. But will it be enough of a change, to be honest? Like, none of these feel exceptional. Ali Armorsmith, I'd probably say, is one of the best.
If you really feel you need to look for answers, you could go for the Wrathion. I think at this point, the Sulfuras is incredibly impactful. Even if totems start to come down from your opponent, you have the ability to go Primordial Drake and Hero Power all on the same turn. The second Ancestral Spirit being picked up for Dan here. He could potentially go for Ancestral Spirit on the Earth Elemental again and summon 2 Earth Elementals when it dies. This is an absolutely insane amount of value. Now when a Brawl comes down, it will probably make the board even higher damage for Dan.
The only issue with this play, and I feel like this is it's slightly overzealous, it's kind of like a win more play, right? Because if you've already got one coming back when it dies, do you need a second one? And then now he's kind of midway through my sentence, he's like played around what I was going to say. I was going to say Execute is a serious issue at that point. Now, Execute can still happen, but there's got to be a way to play around getting an Execute off and then playing a Brawl once both Earth Elementals are out there. Hot Spring Guardian means that it wasn't damaged initially, but that's a nice dirty rat to pull out. Kalamos stops the powerful effect at the start of the turn, but still just drops a 7-7 on the board.
I think Jambray completely disagrees with you saying that's a pretty nice pull from the Dirty Rat. He was definitely looking for something a little bit smaller. Obviously, as you said, denying any kind of battle cry value. But are we potentially just looking at lethal right now? These high health taunts are a little bit too annoying for Dan to be able to get through cleanly. But he's getting remarkably close to finishing off his opponent. And as I've said already, that Brawl is potentially just going to add damage to Dan's board. So things looking very scary for Jambray indeed.
So Jambray, in one of these situations where you're kind of watching the game play out at this stage, the Mana Tide in the hand of Dan, he's basically just going to be playing whatever he finds off the top of the deck at this stage. But he's going to consistently be smashing damage into the face of Jambray. And this is one of the downsides of Sulfuras, is when you play that card, you lose the ability to armor up. And in these kind of scenarios, you can't afford to lose that.
Absolutely. He would definitely rather be in a position where the Control Shaman is simply getting all its removal, all its heal in the cards that it needs to get to this late stage in the game. But unfortunately for Jambray, Dan has just drawn his meaty minions towards that he has towards the top end of his deck. That Whirlwind really not going to be helping, as there is no sleep with the to add the damage in addition to that. So it's just going to have to be the game plan that Warrior does in the late game when threatened by big minions. If you just put down your taunts, you know that they are going to die, but you simply do not care because you are hoping that these will be enough to remove most of the health from your opponent's minions. Then you can start removing them with the Ragnaros hero power.
Yeah, just hope that they slowly but surely whittle themselves down on these taunts. But with the second Mana Tide now in hand for Dan, he still hasn't seen a Brawl this game. So whether or not he plays this one, we'll have to wait and see. But the Hex is certainly an option right now. Remove that Death Rattle, remove the option of an even bigger taunt later on into the game. Still not lethal though, that's the important thing.
Absolutely, I think the Hex here makes a good amount of sense as the only big minion left in the deck really now that we've seen both Primordial Drakes played would be the Matriarch that could come down after this Direhorn Hatchling dies. However, Dan thinks that he will be able to deal with that after it comes. Potentially, he thinks if he plays that, I'll just Hex that one instead of the Direhorn Hatchling, and then I can be able to push more damage on a later turn. And Dan is really just showing no sign of slowing down. Even that Lightning Bolt, a very low mana card, but just being able to push damage through a taunt is incredibly impactful. However, there are absolutely no taunts available left in the Taunt Warrior deck.
Now we're in a situation where Jambray needs a miracle. And it looks like Ravaging Ghoul is going to be his way of trying to find that.
Starting to get some of the incredibly high value plays that you can get. The Tempo Warrior was playing a lot back in the day where you did run Acolyte of Pain and Armor Smith as two of your most important cards. And I know that in the Chinese scene at least, they favour the card Battle Rage a lot in these Taunt Warrior decks, but definitely in the Western scene it's not something that we've seen. And even at this point, if he was able to draw 3-4 cards, it just wouldn't be quite enough because he's under so much pressure, and that is going to be the game.
Yeah, that Jade Lightning off the top is going to finish things off, and that means Dan has come off to a very strong start in this series. That Earth Elemental just proving too difficult to defeat, and Jambray only just finding an execute so late on into that game. I feel like that factor alone has been a huge matter in that specific match, and it means that Dan is off to a phenomenal start.
Absolutely, things just really lined up perfectly for him there. You can often find yourself in the position, I would imagine, in that matchup where you don't apply enough pressure early on, and then the Ragnaros hero power is just able to pick off your minions one at a time because he lumped everything on together so early on and went for that double Death Rattle on the Earth Elemental. Yes. There was no way to slow down the damage from Jambray, only to kind of delay the inevitable, and the inevitable did come.
It certainly did. Now, Warrior and Priest remaining, and would not be surprised at all to see a very similar Warrior deck coming out from the likes of Dan, that exactly the same as what we've just seen from Jambray. It definitely feels like probably the strongest Warrior right now, with Pirate Warrior obviously still a very strong deck, but in tournament formats, it feels like people are favouring going for more mid-range and control decks that generally do well against that kind of aggro.
I would absolutely agree, because I think one of the main considerations is that people believe that the Taunt Warrior is the strongest deck, and because of that, it makes the Pirate Warrior so much weaker, because you can't really afford to bring it in a quest control warrior heavy meta. And here we can see you are absolutely right. Dan is bringing the same control quest warrior. And this is a matchup where the sole purpose, all you want to be considering, is playing taunt after taunt after taunt to complete your quest as quickly as possible. The Ragnaros hero power makes such a massive difference if you can complete it early on.
Yeah, finding that Sulfuras as fast as possible is going to be the name of the game. Now, Dan SWF, looking at his options right now, I'd assume that you're going to get rid of the Brawl at this stage, but I think he's thinking about the options of getting rid of Dirty Rat or not. Basically, what are the odds that I'm against something bad enough that Dirty Rat just ruins the game immediately for me?
It's interesting enough, I think Dirty Rat is actually a fantastic keep in this mirror matchup, because the biggest minion you're going to be pulling from your opponent's hand is Primordial Drake. And even in that situation, that is the worst case scenario, and it's still a taunt that your opponent isn't able to play, because in order to complete the quest, you have to play the taunt minions from your hand. You cannot have them summoned, so you are very, very happy with pulling the minions from your opponent's hand. Does pull the Direhorn Hatchling here, which is a pretty scary minion, and all of a sudden Jambray is very far ahead on the board.
Yeah, and this is the issue with the Dirty Rat, is yes, you're absolutely right. You don't get to play the taunt to finish your quest. You don't quite get that, but you definitely get a huge amount of board presence just off the back of that alone. And with the Fiery War Axe, he was able to immediately deal with the Dirty Rat, and now we see the Stonehill Defender dropped, and the decisions available, none of them feel particularly bad. I like the Shieldmaster just to play on curve, but you do already have the Bloodhoof Brave.
Yeah, it's a tough one. The synergy between Cornered Sentry and Brawl can actually become quite apparent later on. If your opponent commits only 2, maybe 3 powerful minions to the board, you play the Cornered Sentry in addition to the Brawl, and maybe only a Raptor survives for your opponent, and potentially he is seeing that synergy, And also, it's just a cheap taunt, so if in the later turns your mana cost is a little bit too high on all your minions, if you draw Curator, Primordial Drake, things like that, something just to fit in with the rest of your mana cost.
Yeah, just weave it in there on those later turns where you're struggling to fully fill out your curve. But shield block once again from Jambray, as he's just searching for answers, and for the second game in a row, it feels like he's not really finding them.
Yeah, 2 brawls in hand for both players. For a good long time, those are going to be pretty dead cards. But I suppose if you're going to have 2 dead cards in your hand, you'd rather your opponent has them as well. And that is a very nice pickup for Dan. Just completely makes his next 2 plays very nice and easy. You just play out your stuff turn after turn. And same can be apparent for Jambray on his turn. Bloodhoof Brave, both players just keeping their developing going. That's all you really need to be considering at this point. At Stonehill Defender, a very nice pickup for Jambray to keep even in this taunt race.
Now, I don't mind just playing Bloodhoof here because you can absolutely keep tempo. Jambray will just attack into this with his weapon, then finish off with his Direhorn Hatchling, as obviously that it's going to die anyway, so make sure that the Enrage is going onto the right target. Don't just allow free damage to your opponent. That Matriarch will be shuffled in, and that can be a huge card, especially imagine the scenario where Jambray draws that next turn, gets a 6/9 for 5 mana on turn 5. It's very unlikely, but it could have been beautiful.
I was expecting it to happen now. I believed it so much, but he's going to have to go with the Stonehill Defender. I say have to. That's a pretty fine play to make. Once again, some perfectly acceptable options here. If you're going to go for the 4 mana slot, Bloodhoof Brave probably feels like the pick, but perhaps you just want the highest value minion in the Psychotron. But I think in general, the kind of pattern I'm seeing is going for the cheapest minion off the taunt picks with the Stonehill Defender. However, the Psychotron could potentially be very, very nice if you're expecting from the next few turns from your opponent some higher attack minions, which the Divine Shield could cleanly absorb.
Armor made.
Now that Armor Smith just going to be dropped as well, because he knows that there's going to be trades coming back and forth over the next few turns. Realistically, I mean, what are the ways of dealing with that Armor Smith? Things like a brawl, but who's going to commit a brawl in this scenario? So you're fairly sure that that's going to be safe for the next few turns, and you can happily just stack up some armor for yourself, especially considering he has that Ali Armor Smith on the go. It's likely that he wanted to go for some trades just to build up his own armor.
That's true, and actually, the Armor Smith here from Jambray does a pretty good job of countering the Cornered Sentry. He probably doesn't realize it, but each of those Raptors attacking in would build up armor. And although this isn't the most important matchup to build up armor, potentially you just buy yourself 1 more turn against the Ragnaros Hero Power when we get into the late game. It all comes in chunks of 8. I'm going to have to remember my 8 times tables, I think.
Yeah, that'll be a true test of arithmetic later on. But Dirty Rat, as we discussed earlier, doesn't feel too awful this turn. You just drop it once again. Gets the Cornered Sentry out. Would have been exceptional to get that Curator, but either one still feels good. Once again, denies getting that proc on the quest.
Absolutely, you would not care about the fact that you are pulling out a bigger body from the Curator, because that is so much draw that you are denying from your opponent. And it's the scariest kind of draw because it is guaranteed taunt minions. And if you can, and the Dirty Rat here just would have been so fantastic to deny your opponent the taunt from the Curator and play a taunt of your own, but you're not sad to get the Cornered Sentry either.
So now Curator feels like the perfect turn here. I mean, Curator on 7 pretty much always feels pretty good. It's one of those cards that if you can play it on curve, it's just great. You get the draw, you get a nice beefy minion onto the board once again. Now both players really starting to build up a huge board for themselves. Neither one really able to threaten the opponent's board, though. There are all these high health, low attack taunts, and both of them, if they go for these trades, is just going to help armor up their opponents. So it's this weird situation where you both got a massive board, but neither of you is willing to start that trade war.
Exactly. I believe the phrase is wet noodle fight, where neither player is able to really do anything. It's kind of the calm before the storm. Each player gently slapping each other with their wet noodles.
The calm before the brawl, I think, is the best phrase of this scenario.
I think that's absolutely right. And also, just before those fireballs start coming down, very different to wet noodles in terms of damage delivered. And now the fact that simply the higher mana taunt was picked up by Jambray is going to be very nice, because it's just a little bit of extra mana that he can fill in. It would straight up be 4 mana instead of 5 mana. He has, you know, no reason to not go for the 5 in this situation, as it turned out. The execute you probably don't want another one, but using Execute in this situation isn't too bad. It can make quick work of some of these high health minions from your opponent. But to be honest, you really don't want to be committing Executes at this point, because you would much rather simply use the Brawl to remove your opponent's minions later on the next coming turns, and then Execute later on down the line, potentially to remove some of your opponent's minions when there's less of them on the board, and then start slamming your hero powers to the face.
So now, a big question in this matchup is, how long do you hold your Brawl for? What are you holding that for at this stage? How soon are we just going to see a player drop the Brawl to just try and remove what is here on the board?
Well, the thing is that there's not actually that much disparity between the board, if you want to put it that way, in terms of attack values. And so using cards like Primordial Drake here instead, where you can more accurately dictate how the trades are going to work, whereas with Brawl, it would be a lot more random. You're giving your opponent a tremendous amount of armor with this line of play. But I guess Dan is thinking, if I can gain board control at this point, it doesn't really matter, because I'll be able to smash my opponent in the face and remove it all. But finally, we do see that Brawl come down as Dan makes a push to remove his opponent's minions. Ali Armorsmith surviving. Pretty middling result.
Yeah, nothing too crazy, but nothing terrible either. So Ali Armorsmith will survive on this one, and Jambray just deciding how to finish off that turn. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see the Stonehill defender dropped here. Now, one thing that is important to point out here, as you mentioned earlier, armor isn't the biggest factor in this matchup, but that Primordial Drake last turn with the Armorsmith on board has meant that Jambray is now on 15 armor. Now, obviously, while it's not the biggest factor, 15 is still a lot of HP to build up for yourself.
Yep, it could potentially function, if you want to think of it this way, as an ice block, because against the Ragnaros hero power, just giving yourself one extra turn can be all the difference in the world, because with that 8 damage you can do some truly disgusting things. But now we can finally see Dan has completed his quest. This is where things truly start to heat up. Ha ha. Goes for the adapt here. Liquid Membrane feels very rarely like the pick, but in this situation, just protecting this minion from exactly Execute or Shield Slam seems like the play from Dan. Could have gone with the Death Rattle in the plants, but just protecting it kind of gives you a 5-5 rather than 2 1-1s, if you want to think of it that way.
Yeah, for sure. And now Sulfuras available for Dan SWF. And that would activate that new hero power, that Die Insect, 8 random damage every single turn. Jambray suddenly with a lot to answer for in this turn. He's going to be able to drop yet another taunt for himself. I'm not 100% sure how many he's up to at this stage, but he's got to be getting close to the quest himself.
Remarkably close indeed. I think the pull of the Dirty Rat in the first turns of the game really slowed him down. Just that one tick difference can make all the difference in the world.
So apparently Jambray is on 5 out of 7 on his quest for now. So still a couple to go, and only has 1 taunt in hand, importantly. He could do with drawing something like a Dirty Rat, a very low-cost taunt, so that he could play the Psychotron and a Dirty Rat, and then get Sulfuras out on that same turn.
Yeah, that would be tremendously impactful, because if it is 2 turns away before he gets the hero power down of Ragnaros' Die Insect, by that point Dan is going to have removed all his armor and probably dealt with very easily all of his minions. Every turn that you are not having that Ragnaros hero power while your opponent does is devastating to your board, and there is no taunt picked up. However, Acolyte of Pain is a perfectly decent minion to pick up just because you can draw towards that taunt.
Well, he's going to have to draw towards it very quickly at this point in the game, because things are not feeling so hot for Jambray. Dan has got himself in a very nice situation. He's got minions on board that are very difficult to deal with, and that Ali Armorsmith especially just going to be stacking up the armor for himself. He's got through the metaphorical ice block of armor that Jambray had built up for himself that we mentioned a few turns ago. He's already got his hero power to keep chunking away, and Jambray still a couple of turns away from actually getting that of his own, and this board is only going to get scarier.
It is indeed. Saving that second Brawl could potentially be worth it, because if you actually look at the Control Warrior deck, the amount of very big, scary, must-remove minions is incredibly low. It's mostly going to be their hero power is the way that they win through the late stages of the game. So removing these couple of minions could be good, but I absolutely agree on this turn with simply trying to draw, as we've said, towards that taunt, and he does get it. This does mean that on the following turn, he will be able to complete his quest, but unable to play Sulfuras unless he picks up a cheaper taunt.
So now a few plays available to Dan in terms of this turn specifically. 2 brawls in the hand still. There is the option to go for something like that and just basically make it worst case scenario 2 targets for your hero power to hit. You're going to be dealing with a lot of the board. Now, whether or not he's going to go for that, I don't think he will immediately, because you have some relatively favorable trades that you can make on this turn, and then you've got things like your Ornery Direhorn that just a huge minion to drop down on the board. We've already seen how impactful one of them has been for him. The hero power not hitting quite as he would have liked though.
There's no truly terrible result on this board with no clear standout minion. And I think Dan should have considered going for the brawl there, because your opponent's minions are definitely much more valuable than yours at the moment. You simply need to be pressing that hero power every turn, and that's kind of all the value you need, because it's either going to be killing your opponent or clearing stuff off, and goes for another liquid membrane. It's really not that bad of a result.
And you can see that by Jambray's face as well. He was not happy about that one coming out. Now, one option available to Jambray is, again, I've mentioned it a few too many times, I fear, that brawl. You can go for that, but again, it just really doesn't feel like you get enough value out of that scenario. Looks like Primordial Drake will come down after getting that trade, making sure that one of them is on 2 HP. And we'll just have to armor up. He has finally, though, activated that quest. Jambray will be able to start to replicate some of the pressure that Dan has been bringing to the table. And actually, when you look at the hands of these 2 players, there isn't that much in the hand of Dan right now. That Primordial Drake, though, certainly makes that feel a little bit better.
Exactly. A real slap in the face of you right there, Munch. I hate to break it to you, but that is a massive switch up in terms of value in the hand. Potentially getting something massive from the Stonehill Defender as well. Tarlord is available, but I wouldn't hate going for one of the cheaper minions, because you can just throw down your big minions on the next couple of turns. However, Tarlord does survive a Ragnaros hit, which I think is the most important factor in this place.
Yeah, and also just the option to keep on throwing down these massive threats turn after turn after turn. Not that Tarlord in itself is a huge threat to your opponent, just something that they have to actively deal with to keep ahead in this kind of matchup. Now, once again, we see this board that's just very awkward for Jambray to deal with. I'd love to see something like a Sleep for the Fishes come out for him right now. Alongside that Primordial Drake, there's a lot of combos available to him, but he's not been able to find that. Sulfuras looks like it will be the answer to this scenario. Yeah,
you need to remember that as good as any of your minions seem, 8 random damage for 2 mana is probably better than any of those results. Goes for it here and gets faced. Jambray is indeed a sad boy with that result.
Yeah, that feels
bad, man.
Yeah, yeah. We're gonna go full Pepe on this one. But again, this board, immovable it feels from Dan right now. The Direhorn Matriarch will come down. Just basically means that we have to see some kind of trades come out from Dan, unless he just opts for a brawl, which I would be quite surprised to see a brawl here. The Die Insect will come down, does land, and that means that the Tar Creeper is an easy trade. You could even drop the Armor Smith before going for the trade if you wanted, just to try and build up a little bit of armor for yourself, but it would mean that you can't play something like a Tarlord.
You could even just go for the Primordial Drake here if you wanted to instead and push all the damage to face, but as you said, that trade with the Tar Creeper is so enticing. And now you are at the point where any hero power that goes to face will simply close out the game. And that is a fantastic spot to put yourself in, because it's unlikely that you are going to see more than 2 minions maximum on a turn from your opponent. So Jambray is going to have to find something pretty outstanding here.
And now that attack in from Sulfuras as well might seem like Dan's just trying to rush for the end. It doesn't make a significant difference in the grand scheme of things because of the hero power, but with the Tarlord on the board, that hero power means a shield block does not protect him at that stage. The Tarlord plus hero power is exactly 9 damage, which would be what the shield block got him to. So protecting himself a little bit there, just in case his 5/3 did die to a Sleep with the Fishes or something similar.
So in this situation, the only real line of play feels like you go Ravaging Ghoul to damage the Tarlord, you execute it, and then play Ali Armorsmith. You can't go for the hero power, but maybe you have to. However, if you play the taunt down, the Tarlord actually is unable to do any real damage to that. So maybe the Ragnarok's hero power is the better option to weave in rather than the execute and pray that you hit that ornery Direhorn. But even in that situation, your opponent can just go for their hero power and they have a decent chance of finishing you off on the spot. But it is going to be an absolute miracle to dig you out of this situation. He does hit it though. This gives him a chance.
And actually, not going for the execute this turn, respecting the fact that that Tarlord on his opponent's turn isn't a major threat. So just getting that taunt down ASAP and also adding a target for Dan's hero power to actually hit there, making sure that it's not a simple 50-50 coin flip for Dan to win the game.
So in this situation, Dan can give himself, at worst, a 50-50 coin flip to win the game on the spot. As you just said, he could go for the brawl and simply take his chances. He has a 1 in 3 to get guaranteed lethal, and then a 2 out of 3 to get a 1 out of 2. You keeping up?
Just about, just about. It's been a while since I did fractions at school, but it looks like he's not going to win out the brawl entirely. He doesn't win the game on the spot from the brawl, but he is going to win the game on the spot from hitting that hero power and winning that 50-50. Dan is now 2-0 up in this series. Much like Jambray's start to the entire season, he is now 2-0.
He is indeed, and that just demonstrates the devastating power that even just 2 turns without the Die Insect hero power compared to your opponent having it can have on the board, removing cleanly every minion your opponent played. Just too much.
And it felt as well like holding on to those brawls early for Dan was actually very impactful into the game. It felt like the first player to actually kind of chicken out and use the brawl suddenly lost that advantage in that they were no longer the one being proactive. They were no longer the player that was actually in charge of the game and putting their front foot forward. Now, Dan, final deck remaining is going to be Priest. Jambray, if he wants to win this series, he has to not ever allow this Priest to win a game, but it is going to be a Dragon Priest coming out from Dan SWF.
Very interesting. We've kind of seen the tide shifting away a little bit from Dragon Priest. People were very excited at the start of Ongoro to see that it's in fact not a dead deck. The fact that Draconid Operative is such a devastatingly powerful minion and that the Netherspire Historian has an almost guaranteed chance, it feels like, to discover that Draconid Operative makes it a decent enough shell in combination with the Primordial Drake as well. But clearly Dan thinks that the newer versions of the deck that ignore the Dragon package are not the way to go. It's going to give him some nice options though, because if he can get those 4 Draconid Operatives, as you can get with the 2 in your deck and 2 from Netherspire Historian, that's a tremendous amount of value.
Yeah, we'll just drop the Crawler immediately here. Since he knows what this Warrior deck is already, he knows that there aren't going to be any Pirates run along anywhere in this one. He's hovering this, considering, is there any way that there's a pirate that I didn't see last game? Is there going to be a Corsair or something hidden away in there? But I think correct decision to assume not in this scenario and just play on curve.
Absolutely. I think there are basically no Taunt Warrior decks that run Pirates. Obviously, the only way you can get it is discovering the Taunt Pirate off of the Stonehill Defender. And here, things working out pretty nicely indeed for Dan, just playing stuff on curve, which often feels like the way it goes with this Priest deck. You're often thinking with Priest that it's a weird deck that does all kinds of crazy stuff, but a lot of the time, it's not going to be going for that line of play. You simply play your incredibly powerful minions on curve, and that gives you a fantastic shot. Defender of Argus actually put in the deck for Dan, which is a very interesting inclusion.
Yeah, and with that Defender of Argus in hand, doesn't this feel like someone playing Zoo right now? You just play minion after minion on curve that are kind of awkward to deal with immediately, and then on turn 4 you play Argus and suddenly you've got this devastating board that is just incredibly difficult to deal with.
Absolutely, and it's a stark difference from the last game where both players had both brawls, and here Jambray has no brawls in hand, and once that Defender of Argus comes down, this is definitely a board that you want to brawl, because you're not going to be seeing anything significantly more threatening than this from a Priest most of the time.
Yeah, and I mean, this has always been the story of Dragon Priest, right? You play on curve, and a lot of the time, if you've found the right minions at the start of the game, you can just be... You can have so much pressure early on, devastating amounts that very few decks can actually deal with. Even in unfavorable matchups, if you curve perfectly, it's very difficult to deal with the value that you get from dragons. And this isn't even with dragons on the board. This is just without playing on curve. So you can imagine the power if you get those, or if you used to be able to get those early dragons. Less so now, obviously, since some of them were rotated out. Dan taking his time on this turn, though. Doesn't want to go for that Argus immediately. Wants to find some more answers, deciding that his hand was starting to feel a little bit empty on this one.
I think that's what we were saying, is that we obviously know that Jambray doesn't have a Brawl, but that is not apparent to Dan. And he feels if he went for this line of play and just allows the Cleric to die, that's so much draw potential just gone from his deck. Dirty Rat picked up from Jambray can be incredibly powerful in this matchup. There are some crucially powerful minions for Dan in the Dragon Priest deck. If you can pull something like Lyra Sunshard out of the deck, at least Trailblazer perhaps, those are hugely impactful minions that generate tremendous amounts of value for you.
Yeah, and also with that Whirlwind Execute in the hand as well, it would have been an easy situation to deal with. But Jambray not wanting to go for any kind of flashy plays just yet. As we've said before, in this deck specifically, you just want to be able to get those taunts out as fast as possible. There's the Lyra we were talking about before. Two very, very high impact cards, one after another right there. Dan is looking for a very powerful turn next turn.
I mean, it's unfortunate for Jambray that he doesn't have a Fiery War Axe, because in that situation where he would have the ability to kill Radiant Elemental, pretty much every minion he could pull from his opponent's hand would feel fantastic. He does obviously have the ability after Dirty Rat to go Whirlwind Brawl to kill anything that comes out, but that feels like a lot of resources to commit. So at this point in the game, just playing his taunt minions on curve, as you said, perhaps waiting for the Dirty Rat to go in combination with the Brawl that could be picked up later on.
One of the things as well about this Priest deck is quite often the late game can be somewhat inconsistent, in that a lot of what you're relying on, things like at least the Trailblazer and Lyra, have mechanics that are not consistent, like at all. In terms of how they work, they are just simply not consistent. And if you just happen to get a really bad pack off of Elise and you happen to not really draw the right spells from Lyra, the late game for this deck specifically can really start to bite you in the bum a little bit and start to just feel like it's just not good enough.
Exactly, and not to kind of just insinuate that you are behind the curve, but I think that a lot of Priest players realized that potential a little while ago, and that is why the inclusion of Medivh and the double Free from Amber package has started to become apparent, because if you don't get what you need off of Elise or Lyra, that insane value that you can get in the late game definitely feels like it gives you a lock against some of the other control decks that you might see in the meta.
So now once again, looking at the hand of Jambray, he has ways of dealing with things now. You could go for a turn where you Whirlwind into Ravaging Ghoul into Sleep with the Fishes. That does completely clear the board. Suddenly Jambray would be the one with his foot on the accelerator. But it feels like a lot of resources to commit to. Realistically, not that big of a board. However, even though it's not that big, it's a lot more threatening than anything Jambray can throw out right now.
Exactly, and another thing that you have to consider is Jambray has got to be pretty scared about what is in Dan's hand, because we've seen a lot of healing over the last few turns, a build-up of cards, and Priest is a deck in particular where when you have all the cards together in your hand, they're stronger than the sum of their parts, because when you go Lyra into Radiant Elemental, into a whole bunch of treat spells, that's when the sax music really needs to be lined up and you get some truly disgusting combos. Already, there is the Un'Goro pack. That is both a blessing and a curse, though. It gives you the potential to gain tremendous amounts of value at any point here on in, but you can't discover it off the Shadow Visions, which is one of the most powerful combos available in this deck.
Now, a few options available, and one of the things about this Priest deck as well is there are always lots of options available when you're playing this kind of deck because of the way that all of your cards work. But I don't mind doing something just like dropping the Defender of Argus this turn, because realistically, there's no major threats in terms of board presence that you're going to have to protect yourself against. So just trying to build up the presence that you have a little bit more, push a little bit more damage, try and force out something like a Brawl, something like Sleep with the Fishes, try and find those answers that he has and get them out of the way early. Doesn't feel too bad.
Yeah, I definitely like starting to use some of your cards at this point, because obviously against some control decks you have all the time in the world to eke out every single drop of value that you could, but that is not the case against this Quest Warrior deck. After a certain point, when that Ragnaros hero power comes down, you all of a sudden have a very fast clock put on you. So playing the Defender of Argus there, I would not have hated at all. Lyra Sunshard is pulled from Jambray. That is a must-remove minion.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're going to play a Dirty Rat, it feels like, generally speaking, you're willing to play it into must-remove minions, because, generally speaking, you're going to have an answer in hand, and he absolutely does. Sleep with the Fishes will come out alongside that coin into Execute, or in fact into Ravaging Ghoul, sorry, that will finish off this board. And suddenly, we find Jambray finally in a position of power in this game.
Absolutely. Utilizing that combo that you mentioned earlier of going Whirlwind, Sleep with the Fishes and Ravaging Ghoul all in one turn, but saving it a turn or two to use in combination with the Dirty Rat, which proved to work out massively to his favor, because all of a sudden Dan's hand is looking significantly less powerful. Nothing to be sniffed at, mind you, but definitely a lot less going on.
So now, a few decisions to make this turn, but nothing feels exceptional in this scenario. The Armorsmith will go down before making that trade, just getting as much HP as possible, and then that Execute will come down as well. Now, the hand that Jambray has right now is really going to struggle if we start to see those late game cards like the Amber that we mentioned earlier. That would be a devastating blow for Jambray right now. Luckily for him, though, Dan doesn't have anything of the like.
Exactly. I think if you're going to be putting in the Dragon package, you're definitely not going to have room for the Free from Amber Medivh combo, so probably not too scared of that. And in general, the quality of cards that you can actually get from the Draconid Operative is going to be fairly low against the Warrior. Definitely not going to be able to apply much pressure at the very least, because the vast majority of Warrior's minions are taunts with low attack, and that is not what you want to get at all. Could obviously find the Direhorn Matriarch after that is shuffled into the deck, but other than that, nothing too insane.
So, I don't mind here, just Jambray starting off the turn with a Stonehill Defender. It looks like he's actually opting towards a Primordial Drake here. Clearly wants to get that one extra armor. Could now Shield Slam down the 4-3, but to be honest, I wouldn't mind just going for the Stonehill Defender in that scenario, just finding more taunts, just trying to get towards that hero, that quest as soon as possible. But the Shield Slam to finish off the Radiant Elemental certainly makes sense as well. Removes any opportunities for unlimited Shadow Visions.
Exactly. And I think I actually like going for this play with the Primordial Drake, just to make sure that you're keeping up on the board. As I mentioned earlier, that Draconid Operative is an almost certain pick here. Even though, actually, upon saying that you're not going to get much value from your opponent's deck, given that it's a Discover effect rather than a random card, as it is with most Priest cards that copy cards from your opponent's deck, actually makes a massive difference, because you can just pick the best one. That's the power of Discover, and it makes a tremendous difference when some cards are going to be very impactful and some are very weak. I think, once again, that this pick is probably going to be the Bloodhoof Brave, just the strongest minion overall. But a card like the Abomination we saw there, potentially very devastating, but against Priest, very high health minions the majority of the time. So I do like the pick here of the Bloodhoof Brave. And now, this is where the tide is going to turn for Jambray. That Sulfuras is incredibly important.
Certainly is, but it's going to be very dependent on how many minions are on the board and what targets that happens to hit. Obviously, right now, Dan with just 3 minions on the board, but he can easily extend that wider, and it will only hit 1 target per turn. There's not a whole lot of ways right now for Jambray to deal with multiple targets on the board to actually thin that number out at all. Shadow Vision's an option right now.
This is the situation where the fact that Lyra was pulled from the hand and removed, it just becomes so apparent how big of a devastation that was for Dan. Because if he could have gone for the Shadow Visions, Shadow Visions, Shadow Visions, you get the almost infinite cycle it feels like going. That is just as many cards as you want added to your hand. The picks here significantly less powerful. Armorsmith could be used because you do have a huge amount of minions on board, given that you are a Priest. So it could gain a good amount of armor to protect you against those fireballs coming towards your face.
Sleep with the Fishes, though, also feels pretty good in this specific scenario because it means that you can clear away the taunts that are remaining on this board. Now, it does mean that this board now for Dan is very, very vulnerable to the Sulfuris hero power right now.
And he knows that. That was one of the downsides of going for the play that clears off his own small minions as well, but a sacrifice he is willing to make. And this absolutely feels to me like a situation where it's going to be boiling down to that Un'Goro pack. These few minions that are available in hand for Dan, unless he's able to kill his opponent in the next few turns, are going to be removed by that Rag hero power. So depending on what is in the Un'Goro pack, this could potentially be fantastic or not the best position for Dan.
And a little bit surprised to see Bloodhoof Brave not dropped here, but obviously not overly worried about that 5 HP that damage that'll be coming in. Obviously, Priest, not a deck that's renowned for burst damage, it's fair to say. So he's not too stressed in this scenario, willing to wait a turn or two and getting that Acolyte down to find more answers.
Absolutely, and we can now see that that pack is opened.
Pyrus.
Oh, Pyrus, obviously a very weak minion at the moment, but the potential for so much value obviously gives a death rattle of a 6/6 into your hand, which gives a death rattle of a 10/10 into your hand, for those of you who are not aware of how the card works. Hi, Mum.
I think one of the highlights, honestly, of that pack is just an extra Primordial Drake. Just such a powerful card that you can just find so many scenarios that it can turn the tide of a battle for you. Potion of Madness as well in the hand here. Obviously, there's no available trade this turn to get that Acolyte, but had there been another minion, that could have been a huge swing of power.
One of the biggest things I actually want to mention about that Pyros is that the first two incarnations of it are ways to absorb damage from the Ragnaros hero power, but the fact that the last one is a 10/10 means that it can absorb a hit and survive. And given that the opponent is down to 9 health, very few ways to gain armor left in the deck. So damage is going to stick from this point in as soon as the Armor Smith is dead.
So the Brawl comes out, Jambray praying that one of his 2 minions is actually going to survive this one. It's not going to be the case, though. 3-2, probably the best of his opponent's minions, but doesn't even get to clear it. It's just going to hit face.
This is unbelievably close. Jambray at the jaws of defeat and being eliminated from the tournament after he won the entire thing in the previous season. The fact that that ooze survived, it seems like a relatively unscary minion, but it is not indeed. Bringing your opponent down to 6 health. This is so close for Dan.
It's exceptionally close. Shadow Vision's the first play of the turn, just to try and find more answers. And that Shadow Word Pain actually would be huge with the Bloodhoof Brave next turn. That could be what decides this game. And there's the thought about, you know, keeping that for the elemental effect, but realistically, you just need threats on the board. You just need a way to finish out this game and finish out the series, because Dan is 2-0 up and he's looking for a 3-0 finish at this rate.
And that is going to be it. As you said, the Shadow Word Pain coming down for Dan, and he has the necessary damage to close out the game. Jambray is out of the tournament.
There we have it. Our reigning champion has fallen, and Dan SWF will move on into our top 8 here at the ESL Premiership. And what a convincing performance from him as well. Just waltzing on in.